Right, so when is a ceasefire not a ceasefire? When Israel are behind it, it seems. Where some of you beginning to watch this video may cite the fact the ceasefire in Gaza is not meant to start until Sunday, the less well publicised fact is that an immediate cessation of attacks ahead of the official ceasefire start time was also part of the deal. So any and all attacks we've witnessed since the announcement of that ceasefire on Wednesday the 15th of January are breaches of said ceasefire. And Israel have just carried on attacking Gaza in a last-ditch attempt to save some semblance of face before their own people, when the reality is that Benjamin Netanyahu has been forced to accept terms for a ceasefire he has repeatedly turned down previously that risks him being dumped out of power. However, Israel's ongoing attacks now, as petulant and pathetic as they are, have killed another 100 people. Given the timing, it underlines more than ever that Israel's failure in Gaza is not just a military one, but a political one as well, that has destroyed the Netanyahu government's reputation, Israel's reputation, and any sympathy the world broadly had with the Israeli people. But Hamas have also roared back with a warning in light of Israel's ongoing depravity, and for as much as this ceasefire likely won't last, a scam as it is cooked up between Netanyahu and Donald Trump, they will never forget or forgive, and if Israel reneges on this deal, as seems certain that they will, there will be hell to pay. Right, so ongoing attacks by Israel on Gaza since Wednesday are breaches of the ceasefire agreement, even if it doesn't officially begin until Sunday. There is an immediate cessation of armed conflict provision within the deal that kicks in straight away, and Israel have been abusing that and then some, with a further 100 Palestinians in Gaza having been killed since the ceasefire was announced. So for those who have questioned the ceasefire being a scam, who for some bizarre reason seem to think that Israel are all of a sudden a trustworthy entity to negotiate with, be that a belief in Israel or a rose-tinted hope to God for the sake of the people of Gaza, its true attitude, all despite 2 months of a ceasefire incidentally in Lebanon being abused by Israel every single day of it, I might add. That's 100 deaths that already prove you wrong, frankly. And there's no point in being anything other than blunt and matter-of-fact about it, because otherwise you end up watering down the condemnation and just deluding yourselves, don't you? Israel deserve to be spared no quarter in condemnation. What they have done is genocide. As Jewish journalist Max Blumenthal said to Antony Blinken when he roasted him at this week's ceasefire press conference that he gave, this has been the Holocaust of our time. 46,000 people in Gaza dead on official figures at Israeli hands. Projections see that rise to more than 200,000 when you count all the missing people likely buried amongst the rubble. More journalists have died in this conflict than in any other in more than a century, and that includes 2 world wars after all. A ceasefire suddenly gets signed though, and Israel kill another 100 people, and you think it stands for something. Well, don't give Israel any quarter if you believe in it. They don't deserve that. The figures on these deaths have come from Gaza Civil Defence and are up to date up until 9 AM this morning Gaza time, and it shows Israel have continued to strike all along the entire length of the Gaza Strip since that ceasefire was agreed. 82 people have been killed in Gaza City in the north, 14 in Khan Yunis, 5 in central Gaza and 2 in Rafah in the far south. 103 people, including 31 women and 27 children, with a further 264 people wounded, all since the ceasefire agreement came to pass. Do you honestly believe that won't continue? It's little wonder, therefore, that Hamas have slammed Israel for its actions both before the ceasefire agreement and since the ceasefire was agreed, given Israel have not yet chosen to actually cease fire. And the warning has come from acting chair of the Hamas political bureau, Khalil al-Hayya, who came into this role following the assassination of the former chair, Salah al-Aruri, in an Israeli assassination in Beirut last year, you might remember. He has issued a blazing statement to Israel where he has said, "We will not forget nor forgive, and no one amongst us will compromise the rights and sacrifices of our people in Gaza. Our enemy will never see a moment of weakness from us, and our people will not forget those who participated in the genocide. Our people have foiled both the declared and hidden goals of the occupation. We confirm today that the occupation will never defeat our people and their resistance." The military spokesman for the military wing of Hamas, the Al-Qassam Brigade, echoed this sentiment, whilst also bringing bad news to one Israeli family. After the ceasefire agreement was announced, the Israeli enemy army targeted a place where one of the female captives of the first stage of the expected deal was located. Any aggression and bombing at this stage by the enemy could turn the freedom of a captive into a tragedy. So Israel, it would appear, have killed another of their own hostages, though obviously we can only take this spokesperson Abu Obeida's word for that. However, it is documentary that Israel have killed more of their own people than they've rescued who were taken hostage by Hamas. So few believe that was ever really Netanyahu's objective, despite claims it was a major aim of this genocide. That and crushing Hamas, both of which Israel has completely failed to do. We've now learned a little bit more about how this deal went down with the two hard-right ministers in Netanyahu's government, Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich as well now, who have on every previous occasion made threats to bring down the government of Netanyahu if he ever agreed to a ceasefire, both of them backed by the settler movement, who have their own designs on Gaza, of course. Ben-Gvir, we know, already was trying to convince Smotrich to join him in collapsing the government, no longer with his Otzma Yehudit party capable of doing so on its own since the return to the coalition of Gideon Sa'ar's New Hope party last September. Sa'ar having pulled out of the coalition the previous March over being shunned from a place in the war cabinet. Ben-Gvir needed Smotrich to come on board with him to stop this ceasefire for the threat of bringing down the government to be a reality still, but it didn't happen. In a statement put out by the Cradle, it has been said that Israeli National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir announces he and his party, Otzma Yehudit, will resign from Netanyahu's coalition if the Gaza ceasefire/exchange deal is enacted, calling it a disgrace and a defeat, but will return if the war on Gaza is renewed. Ben-Gvir, for his part, had already said himself that if the Gaza agreement passes, we will leave the government, but I will make sure Netanyahu remains in office. So he will return to government if the war resumes. If he actually does leave, he hasn't just yet. He's giving it until Sunday, that official start date, to collapse, presumably. But that speaks volumes about him, doesn't it? And it might not be enough to placate his base, since he won't work to bring Netanyahu down, he says, implying he rather enjoys or finds it rather easy to push Netanyahu around and ensure he does what he wants. But he hasn't got his way with Trump coming back on the scene, and the ceasefire going through now being his demand, regardless of Ben-Gvir or Smotrich. As for Smotrich, this is more interesting actually, and again it is Hebrew news outlet Yedioth Ahronoth that has revealed all, with an excerpt reading, according to Israeli Yedioth Ahronoth, Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and his religious Zionist party conditionally support solely the first phase of the Gaza ceasefire and exchange deal, and demand written assurances from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Smotrich insists that Israel must resume military operations to defeat Hamas and secure the release of all remaining captives immediately after the initial phase. He emphasized that the deal should not undermine Israel's military achievements, warning that his party's continued coalition membership depends on these guarantees. Despite potential assurances from Netanyahu's office, unresolved issues leave the party saying that it is concerned about the agreement's impact on Israel. Now, this is something I postulated yesterday in my piece on the ceasefire being a complete sham, because Trump wanted a ceasefire in place before he took office again. But once he'd got all the credit for that, once he'd milked it as much as he was worth, he'd back Israel returning to the war with his assent and full support. You can imagine, therefore, that any written assurances Netanyahu may have given to Smotrich involved tanking everything at the end of phase 1, saying to Smotrich, this is what's going to happen, with phase 2 planning to bring about the permanent cessation of military activities and the remaining prisoner exchanges, by this time would involve only men, because it would only be men remaining by this point, and would see the full withdrawal of Israel from Gaza. Given phase 2 is 6 weeks down the line, that is plenty of time for Trump to claim credit and for matches to strike up again following that first phase to stop Smotrich collapsing Netanyahu's government and leaving as well, which would also likely see the return of Ben-Gvir to government at this point too. As much as I hate to admit it, this is the logical conclusion to where things are now heading. And of course, Israel ever respecting the ceasefire at all, be it this side of Sunday or not, could be seen as Netanyahu pushing back at Trump as much as he dares. But in no way helps the people of Gaza as they continue to gather their dead over Netanyahu's ego getting bruised. For more details on the full plans of the ceasefire so far as we know them at this point, and indeed more details on what Trump wants out of this ceasefire, which is core to everything, and how he has leaned on Netanyahu to get it, check out this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, to make sure you don't miss out on new daily content and help support the channel, which is very much appreciated. And I will hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.